There are two different free agents named JD that the Mets are reportedly talking to. Will they actually pull the trigger to sign another bat? I'll break it all down on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Now, it was about a week ago where I came on this show and I said, I'm not going to talk JD Martinez anymore. The story has been beaten into the ground. I have covered it on this show enough. We'll see what happens. Well, today, JD Martinez's name got circulated in the media, connected to the Mets again, and I just had to go through the reports because they were very interesting, and they really grabbed my attention when you first started to see the little snippets, the headlines, the little tiny clips of the article that Jon Heyman put out in the Post. As they started to make waves, I got really interested in what was happening here because it felt a lot like what I had predicted a little over a month ago now, where I did a whole show going through JD Martinez's market and how he could fall into the Mets' lap in free agency. If you are still really curious about this story and you never listened to that show, go back and find it. I really break down everything when it comes to Martinez and how this is a viable option for the Mets and how this scenario could play out. And we are seeing the early stages of it, which is the first part. He's not getting the deal he wants in free agency. That's clear. Now, the parts of the story today that grabbed my attention was stemming from this little snippet in Heyman's report. So he says, Mets owner Steve Cohen has apparently given the go-ahead to seriously discuss Martinez, even though the Mets are over the fourth tier, the so-called Steve Cohen tax, and they had to pay 110% tax on any new deals. Now, that was circulating, and basically everyone was saying, okay, David Stearns has the green light to go get this guy, which made me think, all right, is something going to happen here? But the more I actually read the full story, the more I believe we're pretty much in the same place that we have always been. If JD Martinez falls to the Mets on a one-year deal, I think they're going to be all in. But there are other teams interested, and if a multi-year deal gets put on the table, I believe JD Martinez will take that multi-year deal. Here's how I'm getting to all of that, right? For one, it's no surprise or no secret, I should say, that Jon Heyman can be a mouthpiece for Scott Boras. He's been doing it in the Post for decades. So you always have to take a report like this on a Scott Boras client with a big old grain of salt. And here's some of the things that he says that makes me feel like this is coming straight from the horse's mouth of Scott Boras. So he says the Mets are among teams talking to star free agent designated hitter JD Martinez, and the word is the interest is mutual. At one point in the article, he references the fact that JD Martinez hit cleanup in the All-Star game. We've seen Heyman say that multiple times. I am sure that is part of the pitch deck that Scott Boras has when he's talking to teams about JD Martinez. He was the cleanup hitter in the All-Star game. That's how good he was. Now, another thing that he says in this story, word is several more teams are in, but some are presenting lowball offers in case his market doesn't develop. Now, I guess that separates the Mets from presenting a low ball offer, but where is he getting that information? To me, clearly Scott Boras. And then it says here, the Mets look like they have a better playoff chance than the Angels, which could give them an edge, though there are more teams involved. So trying to drum up a market that probably isn't there. Otherwise, this guy might have signed already. The Marlins have shown interest in JD Martinez. That was reported by Craig Mish, but the most they've spent on a free agent all offseason, it's Tim Anderson for $5 million. So are they really going to get in on Martinez, or are they one of the teams that have a low ball offer saying, hey, come back and live in Miami? You're from Miami. You can play for the Marlins. I imagine that's more of what's going on here. So I take you all the way back to that initial podcast that I had on this over a month ago now. And what I said in that show is that JD Martinez just might not get the market he wants this offseason. And if it comes down to choosing between the Mets and the Angels, I believe the Angels are going to have to overpay to get him, or basically commit years. If that's 2 years at $18 million per, maybe they do that. If they hold firm and they are dead set on a 1-year deal, I think the door will eventually be opened where Scott Boras will approach the Mets at whatever that number is on a 1-year deal, and I think the Mets would maybe jump at it, particularly considering how bad their DH situation looks right now, because no one is hitting in spring. We'll talk about that in the final segment. You want to leave the door open to Mark Vientos, I get it, but JD Martinez could significantly move the needle for this team as a hitter that would protect Pete Alonso in that lineup. But then Andy Martino threw cold water on the entire thing. So Martino tweets out, they see Davis more of a roster fit than Martinez because he owns a glove. JD Martinez would box out Vientos. There could be a price at which JD Martinez becomes impossible to pass up, but that has not happened. Again, I think that price just comes down to years. Now, he mentioned the other JD Davis. John Heyman connected the Mets to JD Davis today, as did Andy Martino. How is JD Davis even a free agent? If you never heard what happened here, the San Francisco Giants signed Matt Chapman, so he's going to be their everyday third baseman. That boxed out JD Davis, and they found a way to save a lot of money by releasing JD Davis. An interesting loophole the Mets could take advantage of with Phil Bickford. I'll explain why here. So basically what happens, JD Martinez went to arbitration with the Giants. They are a file and trial team. So according to JD Davis's agent's account, this is from a story in The Athletic, they didn't text an offer to him until like an hour before the deadline to sign. That offer was significantly less than the offer they eventually presented, or hundreds of thousands of dollars less than the offer they presented for the arbitration hearing. And JD's camp came in at 6.9, whatever. I think the Giants might have been at 6.5. Bottom line, they take it to arbitration, and he's awarded the $6.9 million. Well, there's a loophole in the CBA where if a arbitration salary was settled through arbitration and the player is non-tendered or released, they pass through waivers and they're released, then you get out of paying the salary. So the Giants are only on the hook for $1.1 million of the $6.9 million owed to JD Davis. He's out $5.8 million. The reason I say that could apply to Phil Bickford is because Bickford also went to arbitration and won against the Mets. If they decide that he's not going to make their opening day bullpen, they could, at some point, it might even happen before the end of camp, they could put him on waivers. If nobody claims him and they can't trade him, they could release him. It would be saving, hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's not as significant as a $6.9 million salary, but don't be surprised if that happens, is all I'm saying. Regardless, JD Davis is a free agent, and he's coming off a pretty good season where he hit 248, got on base at a 325 clip, slugged at a 414 clip. So you got, what's that OPS? 739 on the OPS, which is solid. 18 home runs, 69 RBIs. He had a 104 WRC plus, so he was 4% better than your league average hitter. He played 144 games. He was a 2.2 F-WAR player, so about a 2-win player when it comes to wins above replacement. His best mark since 2019. As Andy Martinez said, he does have a glove. I want to talk about a reunion with JD Davis, which I can't believe I actually am talking about in the next segment here. Before we get to that, though, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Head over to Prize Picks today. Testing your skills on Prize Picks this season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $1,000 with just a few taps, because it's daily fantasy sports made easy, where you pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. So when the season starts, you can pick more on Francisco Lindor's hits during a game and Jose Quintana's strikeouts. Combine those and you can win big. Or you can add more players from other games. So you can add Luis Arraez's hits in the same play, as well as Mike Trout to hit a home run, combine it all. And again, this is how you can turn something as little as $10 into $1,000 with just a few taps. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the Prize Picks apps today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB, that's in all lowercase, for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Now, anybody who's been listening to this show for some time knows that the last thing I want to see is a JD Davis reunion with the New York Mets. I was banging on the table for JD Davis to be put on the bench or to be traded in 2022 so Mark Vientos could get his shot. And here we are a couple years later where Vientos is about to get an opportunity and JD Davis once again could re-enter the fold. I have to acknowledge, though, that this is not the same JD Davis that left the Mets. He had a really good season last year, and he was great in the second half for the Giants as well in 2022. But let's go to last season. First half of the year, JD hit 277, 350 on base, 450 slug. Add that together, that's an 800 OPS, which is really good. 11 home runs, a 121 WRC plus, so he was 21% better than your league average hitter. But that was the first half, and he was trending towards being an all-star, quite honestly, because in July he was abysmal. His numbers before then were even better. Second half hits, he goes 207, 290, 359 with the slash line. So a pretty rough second half, an 81 WRC plus, so 19% worse than your league average hitter. Only 7 of his 18 home runs came in the second half. But here's where I have to acknowledge that I was wrong about JD Davis. He figured it out defensively. He was worth 5 outs above average at third base. That puts him in the 90th percentile. So in the top 10% of defenders in the league, that is where JD Davis belonged last year when it comes to outs above average. With that said, he was minus 11 defensive runs saved. So the other defensive metric hated him. He made 9 errors. He had a fielding percentage of 967. Do I think JD Davis is suddenly a great defensive third baseman, worthy of being categorized in the top 10% of defenders in baseball? No. Do I think that JD Davis tomorrow could play a better third base than Brett Baty and Mark Vientos? Probably. He's got the experience. I still believe in Brett Baty as a defender, but his metrics were pretty bad last year. You look at what makes JD Davis an exciting fit for any team. They always want to point to the hard hit percentage, right? He hits the ball hard, his average exit velocity as well. He's in the 77th percentile last year for average exit velo, 72nd percentile for hard hit percentage. Here's the downside. Swings and misses a lot. His whiff percentage was 34% last year. That puts him in the bottom 9 percentile of the league. His strikeout percentage was about 28%, puts him in the bottom 20th percentile of the league. Overall, my issue with the New York Mets signing JD Davis is I don't believe he's enough of an upgrade to warrant stopping the development of your young players, which is the same thing I was pretty much arguing a couple years ago. But now, sure, he's a little bit better. And you could say, all right, well, he fills 2 holes, not 1, where JD Martinez would only DH. Like Andy Martino reported, the Mets view maybe a better roster fit for JD Davis because he would be a much better fallback option at third base than Joey Wendell is. And I concede that point 100%. But for me, if the reason you're not signing JD Martinez is you don't want to block Mark Vientos, why exactly are you signing JD Davis to block Brett Baty? And maybe the thought is we're comfortable blocking Vientos with Davis, knowing that we can get him time at third, at DH, first base. He's more flexible. I can understand that logic a little bit, but I don't think he's enough of an upgrade to warrant it. To borrow a quote from Scott Boras, or I guess his mouthpiece, John Heyman, JD Martinez batted cleanup in the All-Star game last year. He is a perennial threat to drive in 100, a proven run producer that pitchers will actually fear if he's hitting behind Pete Alonso. With all due respect to JD Davis, ain't no one fearing him if he's batting behind Pete. No one. So for me, if this was a one or the other, of course you got to go JD Martinez. And also this is just JD Martinez is going to cost way more than JD Davis, and JD Davis could fill roles for your team. I understand the intrigue, but I would then be more worried about having those mouths to feed on the roster and what that means for blocking the guys more than JD Martinez blocking them. If Mark Vientos doesn't get a hit because you have JD Martinez in the lineup, okay, that makes sense. He's going to make your team significantly better. I don't know if JD Davis makes the Mets significantly better. I think he makes them marginally better. But in my eyes, if Brett Baty is not working out this year, I'd prefer to see the Mets then end up in a situation where Luis Angel Acuna is playing third, or he's playing second and Jeff McNeil's at third, or Jet Williams is playing second, McNeil, whatever it is. I prefer to see one of those guys, whichever one is hitting better, get the run instead. To me, JD Davis just doesn't move the needle enough. And also on top of that, does he even want to come back to the Mets? They can be in contact, but he didn't say a lot of great things about his time in New York when he left. This was from a story from The Athletic that was published last season, I believe. He said, I wanted to do what's best for all of those teams, talking about the former Mets teams he played on, but it was hindering my ability. If I were to stick with first base and third base or in the outfield, I think I would have gotten better over time instead of being 50% committed to two different areas. It just seemed like I wasn't getting better at each one. That quote rubbed me the wrong way then as it does now, because did anyone else see JD Davis play any outfield in 2022? I didn't. He was playing third base the whole time. Did he just miraculously improve? And obviously the metrics will tell you he did, but I think he was in his head in New York, and that's as much his fault as anyone else's. So it just seemed like a little bit of, playing the blame game. He says also in here, you feel a sense of urgency in the front office as a player. You feel like you're going to be in survival mode. With a regular role at third base of the Giants, he has been much more consistent. I understand that. I totally get that he got to San Francisco. They said, we don't got anyone much better. You can be our starting third baseman, and that did relax him. That makes sense why his defensive metrics would be better because of that. But that doesn't excuse playing bad in pressure. And does that make you feel any better about him going back to this same team and playing well in pressure again? In my eyes, I don't know. Maybe that's just a player that isn't going to hack it in New York. He said the best in the same story, the best reference I could put on it is when Deion Sanders walked into Colorado and he tells them, you guys aren't my guys. As far as, his feeling with being with the Mets, because he talked a lot about the turnover in the front office. And when he was on the Foul Territory podcast last year as well, this is all when he was having his great season before he fell off a cliff for 2 months after he got his face in the media a bunch, just saying. He was asked about, the difference between San Francisco and the Mets. And he said it's a complete 180. It's a breath of fresh air over here. It's about winning games here in San Francisco, and it's led by a great group of guys in our clubhouse. When asked further about the 180, he talked about all the different GMs in his time, the managers, the ownership change, the lack of stability of the organization. Again, the things he's saying, the comments that he's making, they are all warranted to a certain extent. Not wrong about what the Mets were under his tenure. But using that as the excuse for his performance, I don't know. I just don't think that necessarily, it actually does. It explains his performance. It doesn't excuse his performance is the way I would describe it. So it explains why he didn't play well in New York last time. But what makes anyone think he's going to play better this time? Because he got a year and a half away at San Francisco. He's going to return a different player. If he comes back into the equation right now, he's not going to have the carpet rolled out for him to be the starting third baseman. That's still going to be Brett Baty's job. Maybe he's the everyday DH, but even then, they're going to want to get Mark Vientos in there. They're going to want to get Starling Marte off his feet a little bit to get Tyrone Taylor in the outfield. They're going to want to get Pete Alonso off his feet at times, Brandon Nimmo off his feet at times. I don't think he'd have an everyday role in the New York Mets. So I just don't think that he's going to sign up to come back into this situation. I really don't believe that this is where JD Davis would want to be. And the Mets could touch base with him. Why would they not? He's right now, if you look at the free agents available and they're fit on paper, when you remove all the context, he might be the best fit for the Mets to go out and sign because, for one, there is positions available that he could fill in at. Two, the price tag. If he's trying to make up for $5.8 million that he just lost by getting released, That's going to come in at least half of what Martinez is going to want. Probably a third of what JD Martinez might want. But I think that JD Martinez is 3 times more valuable to this team than JD Davis would be, because he would significantly improve this lineup. I just don't see that from JD Davis. So if the Mets end up being the team that signs him, yes, it makes them better. But I think having JD Davis on the roster instead of Mark Vientos come opening day would be a little bit head scratching, considering everything else that has been spoken about this offseason. I'll leave it at that. There was a baseball game played that, of course, I want to talk about, our daily Grapefruit League update. So I'll talk about what happened on Tuesday in just a minute. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Speaking of the Grapefruit League, if you're trying to catch one of them at spring training games before they leave South Florida, head over to GameTime. That's what I did. My dad and I are checking out a game on Sunday, and I know from past experiences, if you buy a ticket in the wrong place and you don't get under that overhang and it's a hot afternoon, you have a chance to get fried. So the thing about GameTime that I love is you get the view of your seats before you arrive. So I saw the view. I saw that there was shade in the picture. I was like, all right, I'm all set. I probably could have got a better deal if I waited a little bit, because it is the best place to go for last minute tickets. But I liked the price. I liked my seat. I said, you know what? We're going to lock this in right now. Game Time is so easy. 2 taps to buy. You're all set. And I used Apple Pay, so it was really easy. And there's the, all-in total up front. So you don't have to be worried about the hidden fees. They're right there for you. And you can just make sure you're getting that great deal before you check out. Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code Locked On for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Opening day is 2 weeks from tomorrow. If you don't want to miss out on any of your latest Mets news this season, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. It's our texting service where you get updates from me anytime some news breaks on the Mets. It's where you can ask me questions anytime via text, and it's also where you'll get the starting lineup sent to your phone before every game throughout the season, so you'll know who the starting 9 is before first pitch. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, now is the time to subscribe. You can find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, it was another good start from the Mets on Tuesday. Jose Quintana took the ball, and he kept that ball on the ground throughout his entire start. Got 9 outs via ground outs, had 2 strikeouts, and then Brandon Nimmo threw out a runner at third base. Despite the fact that he's in left field and he was like halfway in by the time he got to that ball, he still couldn't get the throw in on a line. Playing left field is going to be good for Brandon Nimmo's career, I'll tell you that much, because it's going to hide that arm a little bit. Whew. Regardless, good outing from Quintana. 4 scoreless, improves his spring ERA to 2.08. There's no pitch data at that ballpark in Palm Beach where the Nationals play, so can't really get even a pitch count on him, but really good outing from him. Joey Lucchesi, not as good. He got rocked, gave up 4 hits, walked 1, hit a batter. Just not a good spring debut for him. Allowed 4 runs, although 2 of them scored after he left, as Nolan Cleaney gave up a 2-run triple. You're not aware of who Nolan Cleaney was or is? Excuse me, was. Geez, he's still around. But I honestly never even think I saw that name before. He has been in the Mets organization since 2021. Has pitched to a 5.03 ERA in their farm system for the last couple of years. But he's made it to the upper levels, so don't expect we'll see much of Cleaney during the season. Reed Garrett threw the ball well, though, to close out the game. 2 scoreless with 3 strikeouts, no hits allowed. So good outing from Garrett. Great start from Quintana. Rough look for Lucchesi, who at this point I would be pretty surprised if he's not starting off the season as the ace of the Syracuse Mets. How's that work? Do you give the ball to the veteran who's MLB depth, or do you give the ball to the top prospects that the fans are probably more excited about? And if it was my team, I'd probably throw Mike Vassell or Christian Scott on the mound for the first game, but I don't think there's going to be too much buzz regardless of who's starting opening day in Syracuse. The offense, though, for the Mets can't score. Figured I should note that one. Another game where they put up just one run. This one only 2 hits. And even further, the Nationals faced only 3 batters above the minimum. 30 batters went up for the Mets in this game. It's pretty brutal. Brandon Nimmo got a hit. Who else got a hit? Zach Short got a hit. That was it. Did not mean to rhyme there, but I did. G-Man Choi 0 for 2 with a walk. Okay, decent day at the office, I guess. Not really encouraging for this continued slog of a DH competition. Harrison Bader went 0 for 3. He's at 1 for 10 so far this spring. But overall, it is a little bit worrisome that the Mets haven't been scoring runs. We can't overreact too much in either direction. The Mets aren't going to have the best pitching staff in baseball this year, and they're not going to have the worst offense. They'll probably find themselves somewhere in the middle on both fronts. But they've only scored 53 runs in 16 games. That's an average of 3.3 runs per game. And it's not that runs per game matters in spring, but it is noteworthy when the Mets and the Marlins are the only 2 teams who have scored less than 60 runs among all 30 right now. The Twins are the only other team that has scored less than 70, and they've scored 68. So significantly worse offensively than the other 28 teams outside of the Marlins. I imagine they'll be better in season, but you're seeing Harrison Bader struggle. You're seeing Brett Beatty, Mark Vientos struggle. Omar Narvaez is struggling for whatever that's worth. Obviously, like Francisco Lindor is going to be okay. But when you're looking at DH, third base, outfield, Tyrone Taylor's been pretty decent, but Bader not showing up, up to this point. Those are areas in the lineup that could be issues during the season. So it's not something to overreact to, but again, as we sort of circle all the way back to the beginning of this podcast, when it comes to adding another bat, that's why JD Martinez makes sense. And because I've already uttered his name on this podcast, I can continue to break my rule about not talking about him anymore. It makes too much sense on a 1-year deal. So, depending on this market, if he doesn't get that multi-year deal and he signs a 1-year, $15 million deal with the Angels, which I don't think he would. I think it'd be more than that. Or even if he signs a 1-year, $20 million deal. As a Mets fan, I feel like you have justification to be upset there. If he signs a 2-year deal, hey, I get it. Because the last thing you want is JD Martinez to have a horrible back injury this season on a 2-year deal. And next off season, you got 15 million plus committed to JD Martinez when you want to pursue Juan Soto to be your outfield / DH. Like that's where you definitely don't want to be looking at. But a 1-year deal with a mutual option, which I discussed, you can go back again to the JD Martinez might fall in the Mets lap podcast. It is now certainly very relevant a month later that I did. That type of contract is one that the Mets should be trying to negotiate right now with Scott Boras. And if he ends up being that absolute fallback where the multi-year deal is just not out there and he decides that the Mets are his ideal team to play this season out with, I think it would make this lineup much better. So we'll see what happens there. I don't believe they're going to sign JD Davis, but hey, there's interest. So we'll monitor how free agency continues to develop as we're, again, almost 2 weeks from opening day. And of course, we'll continue to look at all the different position battles in camp as the Mets have to figure out their opening day roster. That's going to be all for today's show, though. As always, thank you all for tuning in. If you're listening on the audio side, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, help us get to our next big goal, which is 10,000 subs. I appreciate all of you who are hitting that subscribe button. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to Locked On Sports today and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube that covers everything in the world of sports with our local experts from each team and our league-wide experts from each league. You can find Locked On Sports today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.